Welcome to episode 323 of Shop Talk Live. I'm Amanda Russell.
I'm Ben Strano.
And I'm TV's Phil.
How can you top that? That's perfect.
I totally didn't see that coming. TV's Phil humor. Perfect. Oh, wow.
You're welcome.
All right. That's the end of the episode right there.
Yep. The end. I'm out.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, Phil, you have no idea what this episode's about, and Amanda has some idea of what this episode's about. And I'm just going to go on record, and I'm going to say this episode's for me. This is a purely selfish episode. And the bulk of this episode is going to be me talking to a friend of mine who is lives in Nashville and is a recording engineer and makes recording studio furniture.
Cool.
And it's a very, very specific type of woodworking. And this is not information that most people are going to put to use in their shops, but I think it is a fantastically intriguing type of work that he does. There's a lot of odd angles, a lot of weird carcasses that most people would never think to make. And then everything gets covered in Formica, like really high-end Formica. It is a very specific style. And every time he posts on Instagram, I think, this is so cool. I want people to know about this type of woodworking. Mm-hmm. Because there's so many different random styles and practices of woodworking out there. And I thought, let's start broadcasting these oddball woodworkers. So
sure.
That's what is coming down the line. I apologize. We do get a little bit in the weeds from time to time. It is two old buddies chatting, and there's bands thrown out there. There's recording studios thrown out there. And like I said, I made this episode for me.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I
think that's probably one of the best parts about woodworking is like the deeper you get into it, all of a sudden there's all these little branches that you just didn't know existed, or ones that you are all too easy to discount because you probably see like Formica stuff and it's like, awesome, 300 pounds of particle board and Formica. Great work.
Exactly. And it turns out there is way more to it than, of course, there's always more to it than you think, right?
Yeah.
We're talking about woodworking. That's always the case.
Yeah.
Always.
So Amanda, are you said that you're pretty confident in your Woodworking in America outline for your presentation?
I said rough outline. But I feel like I have a pretty good structure going and can get it dialed. So
what about you, Phil?
I don't know. I have enough to have written a description for it. And then from there we'll try and see where it goes after that. I have a few things that I want to talk about. I've written about some of it a little bit. So it's kind of a remix of different things. I have this idea in my head of how my workshop is now and where I'm headed with it. And then something happens and then I kind of remix a different idea or emphasize different points. And so that's what I want to do. That's what I want to do in Woodworking in America.
The overall idea of your presentation is a table sawless shop or a bandsaw centric shop. What is it?
A bandsaw centered shop.
Okay.
I come from a writing school where it's like, don't talk about what you're not going to do, but talk about what you're going to do. So it's not like I'm trying to avoid the table saw. I'm just saying like, this is another way of working that I think is flies under the radar a lot for a lot of people.
Cool.
Yeah.
So you've recently locked down a couple more people for Woodworking in America, right?
Yeah, we did. We had, it's kind of a long story, but several years ago, we wanted to have Matt Cremona on the TV show. And short story long, he got busy, totally ghosted us. never got on the show. Then we had an event here in Des Moines with Woodsmith, and we guilted him into coming for that. So he came. It's totally great. He's a cool guy. And he was one of the more popular speakers. So when we were planning on Woodworking in America, we were trying to figure out like what's the right mix of like people from the different magazine staffs, outside presenters and stuff like that. And then Logan from the show called Matt, and they were talking about, they were sawmilling stuff, and whatever. And then turned out that Matt wanted to come back too, because he had a blast with it. So we got Matt coming back. He's going to talk about working with live edge boards.
Oh, cool.
Which sounds like it's epoxy river tables and waterfall edges and all that kind of stuff. But it's more of like, those boards are really, they're like it. Once you used up all the parts of that live edge board, it's not like you're going to run to Home Depot and grab another one that perfectly matches it.
Yeah.
So he's going to talk about maximizing those boards, how to get them best use out of different pieces and all that kind of stuff. So
that's neat. Cool. I like that.
Yeah. And then we also added Mark Spagnuolo, the Wood Whisperer.
I've never heard of him.
No. He's a guy, he's one of those weird tatted up woodworkers on Instagram that you just see. They're kind of like a dime a dozen now, it feels like. So, no, Mark's great too. He was super jazzed when he heard about us relaunching Woodworking in America, because I think there's a lot of people that remember those events from the past. And I mean, that's why we're trying to relaunch it, is that there's a lot of fun in that experience of being around other woodworkers, knowing that you're not the only person in the room that pulls out the drawers and looks on the bottom sides of tables and all that sort of thing. So,
right.
So it's really cool. We're holding it in there's a junior high building, kind of one of those classic 1930s, 40s junior high buildings that's not being used anymore by the school district. And so somebody else bought it, turned it into an event space. So we're going to use 4 or 5 of the classrooms, the original auditorium, and the wood shop. So it's still got the hardwood floors. You're going to walk the halls and all the lockers and stuff are there. And it just feels right for a woodworking event. Kind of like we all, there's a bunch of people that'll have shop class memories, and it's about learning and kind of having a good time. And we'll be using the cafeteria, which is really cool, where we'll have the vendor spaces and all that kind of stuff. So the venue, the people, what I think is really fun is all the chit chat that kind of happens in between the presentations.
Yeah.
Because it's a lot easier to just talk in person than it is to send text messages or, respond to posts on Instagram or whatever, is your medium. But when you get to just kind of like throw ideas around and talk about stuff, it's always really cool to me. It's a ton of freaking work for us on the front end of it. I've given up way too much time on this thing, on calling people and sitting in meetings and whatever. But I know that once the event gets started, actually even before the event gets started, when we do the open house right here, then it'll be a lot of fun just meeting people and showing people where we work and what we do.
I've always, quite honestly, and Amanda, you just went to IWF in Atlanta and all of those things. I dread them. I don't like traveling. I don't like leaving my house, right? And I dread them. And the moment I get there and I get around the other, I'm just surrounded by woodworkers. It's like, the only party you'll ever go in and be able to talk to everyone there. Yeah. Like I'm very used to being around a bunch of people and not really getting along with hardly any of them. And it's like a woodworking event is like, no, we're all doing the same thing. Yeah. Right.
Or when you introduce yourself. Yeah. When you're introducing yourself, you feel like there's like an asterisk at the end of what you do. It's like, what do you do? I'm a woodworker. And then you got to explain. I actually, do stuff where I write for a magazine, and then I also do this and that. And that means I have to do, and then it's all this big, long explanation. Yeah. So
Amanda, you love these things though.
I do. I just went to IWF, and I love geeking out on the tools, but it is being around woodworkers. I'm like, if I'm at a regular party and I want like deferring to the nearest like cute dog instead of socializing, like I can actually talk at these things. So it's, I love it. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like I said, I do too. It's just a lot of fun when I, we just had the Iowa State Fair here, and the cultural center, one half of second floor is all the woodworking exhibition stuff where there's furniture and carving and scroll saw work. And it's fun to walk around up there and then see some people that I know and just talk about different techniques or tools or whatever. Cause there's usually something in there where it's just like, oh yeah, I could do it that way. That makes total sense.
Yeah. You know what I'm crazy nervous about at Woodworking in America, though, is we're doing a live Shop Talk Live episode, live from Woodworking in America. But the questions are going to be live, Phil. I think you came up with this part. So,
well, we had talked about doing a live broadcast or with a studio audience kind of a thing in the main auditorium, just because I think it would be kind of a fun way to wrap up the whole event. So we're scheduling it for Saturday afternoon. And what we're going to do, though, is Logan is turning a bowl. And throughout the event, you can stop by the fine woodworking, popular woodworking, woodsmith table. And if you have a question, drop it in the bowl, and then we'll stir that baby up for the podcast and then start pulling out questions there.
This is brilliant.
Yeah.
I love it. and it's so Logan's going to turn a big bowl, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Cause it's Logan.
Okay.
So,
he doesn't mess around.
What I wish we could do as part of the Woodworking in America, and maybe we do it next year, is have a tour of the popular woodworking shop where Logan is, because he's got this big, humongous vintage lathe that he needs to get running. That's got all kinds of these leather belts on it. It's like an overhead drive, manual transmission kind of lathe. That, I don't know. He could turn like redwoods on it or something like that. So
that's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, before we dive into my super esoteric podcast episode, I thought it would be cool, Phil, for you to talk about. Are you public with this commission that you've been working on?
I think I've mentioned it a couple of times on our podcast.
Okay.
I haven't shared any photos of it yet, but I think I sent you a few of them. You're welcome to put those up on show notes or whatever. So
good. So like, describe this project that you, and Amanda, I will Slack it to you right now. Oh no, it's on my phone. I can't send it to you right now, but.
So it was some, friends, acquaintances that I have that a few years ago, they have a relatively new house and had some built-ins in their living room, but they have small kids, lots of visual clutter, and they just needed a way to enclose those built-ins with some doors and drawers. So I built those originally. Now they've remodeled their basement, turned it into finished livable space. And then they had two sections where they had drain pipes coming through on two different walls, and they needed that accessible, but they also wanted some storage down there as a built-in. So they hired me to do two built-in units to conceal where those pipes are, but still have access for them, along with a couple of other, like where the phone line comes in, and I think where fiber optic or something like that else is in there too. So it had to have some access ports, but they wanted it to sort of be related to the built-ins that they have upstairs, but also have their own personality. Mm-hmm. And I don't often do a lot of commission work, and I don't do a ton of like big plywood projects. So there are the challenges of trying to, figure out how much time is this going to take? Forever. How many plywood sheets am I going to need? A lot.
All of them.
Yeah. How many rolls of edge banding am I going to go through? About twice what I estimated. All that kind of stuff. So It was really fun. What was nice is that, so the bottom half of it are a bank of 4 drawers and 2 doors. And I matched those pretty well with what they have upstairs. For the upper part, they wanted kind of your bookshelvy storage, kind of like what I got going on behind me here. But I wanted to mix up the style of it so that it doesn't have just like square, boxy, rectangular cubbies kind of a thing. So I threw some mid-century kind of geometric motifs in there with it. And then some played around with like proportioning. So instead of having just a bank of rectangular shelves, there's a couple of dividers in different places to break it up. And then one side is set back from the other. So it's not just a flat wall. It's, half of it is recessed a little bit. And then some of them have removable back panels to be able to get at the various things that you want to conceal, but you also need to get access to when the unfortunate happens.
When you sent it to me, I think you were still mid-process or whatever, the first time I saw it. And it was like,
yeah,
I think I asked you like, that looks like the worst or the scariest glue up ever. And I think you said it was like because the center section is, a box with, shelves that come off the middle of the box, if I remember correctly. Yeah. And it's one of those, which part do you glue first conundrums?
Right. Yeah. When I do stuff like that, I do it all with biscuits.
Okay.
It's just the way that makes sense for me. And I have this biscuit joiner that I just love dearly. And so I did it with biscuits. And then the other thing I had to think about is, how am I going to get this in my minivan to take it over there? Because one of the units is 56 by 80. And then the other one is 54 by 92. So it's like the base units are fine, but the uppers I had to break into 2 different sections. So it's like they're together, but not really together until I do like a final glue up there. But it still all has to go together at some point. I don't want it to be like a surprise when I go to install it. We're like, oh, well, I didn't really see this coming. Yeah. So there were a lot of sub-assemblies that I did, usually starting with the middle parts. And then start adding stuff around the outside. I kind of also had to do that because then that determined like sizes for top and bottom. So you'll see it on the photos. So there's like a floating center rectangle, and then there's a top and bottom pieces and then 2 side pieces. Until I got that middle section glued up, I didn't know necessarily how long any of those other pieces needed to be. So it's one of those things where it's like you have the plans and the drawings, but once you cut wood, then it's like, these are just estimates.
And normally you would build from the outside in.
Right. Yeah.
But with this project, you had to build from the inside out because it was all these sub-assemblies. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
So this perfectly fits the theme of this episode. And I will just tell the listeners, if you're listening on, your podcast app or something like that, please click the show notes. We will have, I will make it as clear as I possibly can. We will have Phil's hutch or bookcase right there at the top. And then you're going to scroll down. And as Kenny and I are talking about recording studio furniture, we will have examples to show, the listeners what a bolster is or what the side cheek of a recording console are. We certainly did our best to describe as we were going, but we were 2 woodworking recording engineers just yapping at some point too. So we're going to take a minute for an ad. And then when we come back, it'll be Kenny and me talking about geeking out like hardcore about recording studio furniture.
Awesome. Can't wait.
Osborne Wood Products Incorporated is celebrating 45 years serving both hobbyists, cabinet makers, furniture makers, and builders. With industry-leading wood species availability and same-day shipping available for most orders, you're sure to find the product you need in their catalog of unfinished table legs, kitchen island posts, corbels, moldings, and more. Known for excellence, quality, and courtesy, Osborne is committed to partnering for your success. No minimum order quantities and quantity discounts available. To receive 10% off your next order, use code STLA323 before September 23rd, 2024.
Regardless of your skill level in woodworking or home repair, you want a glue that you can trust. Because a glue that doesn't work can ruin any project in a hurry. Fortunately, Titebond has the glue you need to get the job done with confidence. From interior glues with strong initial tack and short clamp times, to exterior glues with exceptional strength and water resistance. Look to Titebond for the right glue for your next project. For more information, visit titebond.com, Titebond.com. All right, we're going to start the episode.
Oh, okay.
Because
we started it 5 times already.
Well, no, we're doing it now. This is because Kenny, we met before this. But I remember the first time it was like, oh, the first time you and I like really engaged was in Franklin, the Woodcraft.
Oh, yeah.
Down in Cool Springs. They had like their annual, like once a year they would have like demos and whatever, right? And I remember our mutual friend Justin, I went down there with Justin because he was getting into woodworking. And Justin was like, no, you need to meet Kenny. Kenny throws down.
No, he used to say the same thing about you. Ben, we knew each other already because we...
I know, but it was like we were both recording engineers. We were like, we were never on the same gig because if you were there, I wasn't, Oh,
that's right. That kind of thing.
Yeah, it really is. It's like drummers. It's like...
I know, it's like...
Where are they going to meet, But I distinctly remember you walking up with a set of Norton combo stones for Justin that were worn down to a nub. And you were like, here, man.
They were flat.
I
flattened them. They were combo stones. So they weren't that worn down. They looked like...
but you were already like, hey man, you need some stones to sharpen with.
I brought them into the store?
Or maybe it was in the parking lot. I don't know. But you gave Justin these Norton combo stones. I was like, dude, that dude's right on, And then shortly thereafter, you and I just started talking about woodworking stuff. We rarely ever talked about audio stuff. And you're one person who I have stayed in touch with throughout my time, since moving away. And I think when I follow you on Instagram or whatever, and I see the cool things you're working on, every time you post, I'm always like, I want other people to know about this world that Kenny lives in. Because how did you, so for the listeners, you're half recording engineer, half woodworker, right?
Yes, but I think that people on the woodworking side would say that I'm only half. And people on the music side would say I'm only half. Because people don't want you to do 2 things.
I know. Yeah, you're only supposed to, especially as a musician, you're only supposed to identify as a musician, right?
Yeah.
But
I don't even talk about being a musician anymore because how are you going to fit that in on a business card? Everything that we do today, right?
I know.
Engineer, producer, studio owner.
But for the woodworking crowd, because there's woodworkers listening right now, you specialize in something that most woodworkers might not even think exists.
Formica?
Formica.
I'm going to die early.
We're going to get to Formica, trust me. But you build recording furniture. So recording consoles, you don't build the electronics. You have.
I build recording consoles, but I also restore vintage recording consoles, and those are for like celebrity types, famous people who could afford those. That
Yeah.
type of, you know.
So for the layperson out there, or the woodworkers out there, imagine, you know, when you see a movie where they're in a recording studio, there's you see the row of buttons and knobs and switches and everything. And those are, I will post some photos, but those are generally encased in a piece of furniture. It's like can we call it a trough, if you will?
Yeah, or a carcass.
A carcass, and there is no right angles anywhere to be found on these things.
No.
They are the most oddly shaped and configured and constructed pieces of furniture that you can imagine. And you somehow wrap your head around them and make these things. How did you get into it?
My piano teacher in 1984 brought me to a recording studio near where I lived. And I said, wow, I mean, you know how it is. The first time you go into the studio, this is what you want to do. So I started around 1985 or so. I bought a 4-track and I took out, like, I wasn't really alone. I borrowed some money from family really to do it. And I paid them back from like odd jobs. I was a waiter. You know, what was I, 18, somewhere around there? And I needed some equipment. I mean, I needed racks. I needed a desk. I needed things like that. How am I going to, whatever. And back then there wasn't a Guitar Center or a Sweetwater or somewhere where you can go.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there was no internet. You couldn't look it up. So I just started kind of just building stuff and fell in love, like you did in the early days, with the whole mysterious sort of the myths of recording and all the albums that we grew up on and how they recorded this Helios of Pink Floyd and, you know, the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
We geek out on that kind of stuff. So I was passionate about vintage recording gear all my life. And I was lucky enough to get in with Justin years ago when he was working at a pro audio dealership to, you know, start using my woodworking skills to combine it with that passion.
So, okay, but it sounds like the two kind of happened in your life simultaneously.
Music and building, yeah. My grandfather was a woodworker.
Okay.
You know, and a musician. And he was a double E. He worked for RCA, but he was a machinist as well.
Okay.
And I used
electrical engineer for the double E's, right? Okay.
And a woodworker. And I have some of his hand tools because he was from Poland. And I have a bunch of his old tools, you know.
Mm-hmm.
They're not the greatest, but I have them. You know, but yeah, it's funny how you just fall into something, you know. Do you know there's a famous architect named Louis Kahn? Did you ever hear of him?
Yeah, I know.
Designed at Salk Institute.
Okay.
There's a documentary out maybe about 10 or 15 years ago called My Father, the Architect.
Okay.
And it was all about his life, and no one's ever heard of him. It's because you're behind the scenes, just like what we do. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like a recording engineer, nobody, you know, only people like us look up who recorded it, you know?
Yeah.
But he has some kind of famous quote about how accidental our existences really are and how full of like influence of circumstance. And now we just kind of step into something. Like one day, we were talking about the magazines before. One day I'm just, you know, riding my bike and I buy fine woodworking as a teenager, you know, and start falling in love with it or whatever. And then you kind of just step into it.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, that's just my nervous take on it all.
So, so can you describe the process of building a recording console carcass from scratch?
Yes. As you have, we spent a lot of time sitting at recording consoles. Yeah. And there's a certain aesthetic, you know.
There's a very specific aesthetic. There really is.
And what people might call a wrist pad. We call a bolster. So that's that big rubber sort of vinyl thing we put our arms on.
Generally padded because you're leaning on it for dozens of hours a day.
And you're sitting behind this desk, and there's a certain height that they are off the ground. Usually like an SSL or Neve is somewhere around 28, 29 inches or something like that. You have to know that number before you even start. I'm working on a video right now on the last 3 weeks, where I transplanted a Yamaha PM1000 live mixer. Remember that one from 2018?
Yeah. Okay.
I have 200 hours of video I shot on that. And when I say shooting video, by the way, I mean surveillance cameras in a way. Because they're GoPros and I'm just a beginner.
Yeah.
It's hard enough to do this work, right? Then you have to be a video guy at the same time.
Yeah.
You know, well, anyway, and you look at YouTube, by the way, there's all this glitz and glamour of some of these videos, and I can never get to that. Anyway,
it's impossible. Don't worry about it.
I was looking at that video and editing it the other day, and I'm only 20 minutes in, and it's taking me 3 weeks because there's so many steps involved. Yeah. And in that video, I was describing all that goes into coming up with the design just for the top section of the console, like the angle that some of the modules where you have your EQ and your sends and all that kind of stuff, that angle relates to where it kind of dies at the front of the console.
Okay.
So, and where you want the meter bridge. And all that also translates to how high it's going to be off the ground, because there's a certain thickness that the front's going to be.
Mm-hmm.
Take that into account. You know how it is thinking 10 steps ahead when you're building a guitar.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same thing. It really is.
So generally, are your clients looking for a function or an aesthetic? Are they saying, "Hey, I like I remember the way it feels for my knees to hit the bottom of a Neve, right? And I like that particular angle." You and I are the only two people who are going to get this right now.
I feel right now on my knees, man. It's that you just nest right in there.
Yep, and you push your knee up. Yeah. So, do people come to you with that, or are they just saying, "Hey, I like the look of this console in this Badfinger documentary"?
Maybe. Sometimes. Most people, I take care of all that stuff for them, because I know what I need to do for them. And I call that painting behind the refrigerator.
Okay.
I was recently in a famous studio here, and a bunch of hard drives were just left out on the open for some very famous records. And I took it upon myself to bring them up to the tape vault and lock them away.
Yeah, because you're a good person.
That's not part of my job.
Yeah.
I have hundreds of stories like that. But as far as clients asking for something, I really just design it from, you just kind of go for it. It takes longer, I think, to get going when you're starting from scratch, because you're going from nothing to something every time. It's just like writing a song. It's just like starting an album. It's the same exact feeling for me. Okay, and turn on the mic praise. Okay, what do we got? What's that snare sound like, right?
Yeah.
It's the whole thing. And you were just showing me that Audio-Technica mic that you just bought, or that Greg had. Same thing. It's like, how that mic sounds already for the artist. Just like I kind of know what to do for the client that wants to buy the console. But mainly I'm building for other engineers.
Okay.
Or other famous producers. There's some other famous celebrities that are rock stars or country stars, that have home studios. They're gonna have outside engineers come in. I'm really building for them. Remember I did the Black Keys console, I think in 2011.
Okay.
That one. I was just talking with Dan, from the guitar player, singer guy.
Hour back, yeah.
Yeah, he just told me what he wanted.
Yeah.
And that's the first time I made a hard Formica bolster. Usually they're soft vinyl. Anyway, long story short, his engineer complained that he didn't like it.
Okay.
Or whatever. I'm probably mixing this whole story up, and I don't want to slander the guy. He's a cool dude. In fact, when I went over, how, Ben, when you're in two different domains. Some days you're wearing your engineer hat, you're recording an album, like I was just last week. And tomorrow I'll be wearing my woodworking hat, probably the shaper one. And I'm going to go to a client studio. They don't want to know that you're an engineer or if you're even better than what they are.
Yeah, okay, I get that.
They want to know you're just a woodworker guy.
How good are you at the job I'm calling you for?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I walk into Dan's studio here, Easy Eye in Nashville, and my recording mentor in 1985 was a guy named Joe Santucci. He's still alive. He's in New Jersey. This is a studio I started with. He sold me my 2-track and a bunch of gear when his studio went out of business, and I still have it. This is before the inflation of all the gear, right? And I had a Echo Plate 2, which was the big plate reverb.
Okay.
Right? But it was too big for my space. And at the time, I was dating somebody, and she was going to be moving in. And I was like, where am I going to put this plate reverb? You know what I mean? It was in my living room.
Yeah.
Right? Because I wired it down through the studio. So I sold it. Anyway, I walk into his studio. He wants to show me his plates. And he's got a million guitars. You go into the back room there's the plate reverbs, and there's my plate reverb. And I said, oh, that used to be mine. And he looked at me. He was like, no, you're the woodworker, dude. I'm like, no, that used to be mine. Look at, my name is on the bottom. It says Kenny, right on the bottom. He goes, oh. And, then I knew. I was like, okay, I should shut up. You know what I mean? Because they don't want to know. Because if you're supposed to be the woodworker guy, they want to trust you 100%.
Yeah. You're doing, you live a dual life, and most people don't, they want their woodworker to specialize in woodworking, or they want the recording engineer to specialize in recording. And I get that, but that also makes you you have a much deeper perspective as a woodworker making studio furniture than any other woodworker would.
Yeah.
Right?
And also vice versa, because like we've sat behind consoles, or we know how things should feel and how things should look. The height of a meter bridge can't be like those vintage Helioses with the monitors hitting you like up here, firing over your head. So yeah. You have to, the woodworker, they both cross feed each other. Yeah.
So logistically though, are you making, because the listeners will have to believe me, there is just no right angles. Are you making a template of the side profile and then working off of that? Are you doing everything in CAD first? What is no CAD? So you're sitting there with like a piece of like 1/4-inch MDF or something and drawing lines on it, making sure that the EQ modules will fit in that amount of space or something like that.
Exactly. That's what I was just doing on this. I have about 10, 12 years worth of hard drives full of different console builds, and I'm finally getting around to editing these. And that Yamaha live mixer, the PM1000 I was just talking about.
Yeah.
That's what I did in this video. I had made a template. I drew it out on my bench, and I knew that they were going to mod the EQ modules and put some heavy transformers on the bottom. So I had to I just cut out another piece of MDF that would be the size of all that together and use that for my layout. And I laid it out on my bench, just like, this is why I need to learn CAD and follow your other channel.
Okay.
Because I'm doing this all by hand and a track saw to cut out the thing the best I can. And then I bought the shaper 2 years ago, but I'm still, trying to figure out how to do such a large 4-foot-long side cheek.
Mm-hmm.
What I do usually, I've cultivated a library of different console cheeks, side cheeks, or shapes of consoles. So I would take my 1/4-inch MDF, I'll cut out a certain, size, maybe 4 foot by 4 foot, carry it to studio, trace out the side profile of some of these vintage consoles, because these were all one-offs. The API at RCA Studio A, which I I may have posted something around January. Dave Cobb bought the sister console to that.
Okay.
So Dave Cobb is a famous producer, musician here in Nashville.
Mm-hmm.
Did a lot of big famous records. Jason Isbell and Chris what's his name? Stapleton. And I needed to build a new side stand for it. And using Formica, by the way. And we should get to Formica.
Oh, we're going to get to Formica. Trust me.
What time is it?
Because nobody gets to Formica like Kenny Varga gets to Formica.
Let me say that. I was able to go over to RCA and trace the original console and be able to duplicate what I need to do on the other console that it was damaged. So I couldn't take a tracing.
Okay.
And sure enough, everything was exact on that particular console. And I built a new stand situation for it. The Formica doesn't match, but he wanted it to the original Formica that's beat up on the top section. I'll send you some photos of a lot of these things.
Yeah. So for the listener, Formica is like countertop material, right? It is a plastic laminate. And I really cannot stress this enough. Studio furniture should be covered in Formica. It is the aesthetic.
60s and the 70s.
Yeah. And so I find your Instagram hilarious because you're getting really specific about the walnut colored Formica that is like in my head, it's like, oh, use veneer and trans tint dye, but that's not the thing. That's not right. That is not the song.
And I've done that.
Oh yeah.
I've done.
But you use Formica more than anyone.
Listen, I grew up with Formica in my house.
Yeah, me too.
In the mid '80s, I started working with Formica. I had no idea what I was doing. I almost killed my mom's parakeet because the toxic glue, the contact adhesive, especially back then, was so potent. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I was learning as I was going. There wasn't really a woodcraft kind of store, but you would ask the guy at the Ace Hardware kind of thing. And, you would do all this research and you'd kind of figure it out. You get a router bit, all this kind of thing, right? And I was a beginner at Formica then. And it took a lot of years to really get that right. But I have a love-hate relationship with it. I mean, every time I go to Wilson Art mostly now and not Formica. Okay. And your listeners should know that Formica calling plastic laminate Formica is like calling facial tissue Kleenex.
Okay, yes.
So I just call it Formica all the time. But I really switched over to Wilson Art because I don't have to go to Nashville Plywood, first of all. They opened up in Gallatin, so it's such a trek. Okay. So I go to Wilson Art here.
Nashville Ply's in Gallatin.
They moved 3 times since you were here. 3 times.
I miss Nashville Ply so much, though.
Oh, yeah.
For plywood. For plywood, I've never experienced a place like that.
We had a blight on the Baltic birch plywood here for a while.
I know. So it's.
I finally found a guy in town who can get me 4x8 sheets.
Okay.
So I'm looking forward to that.
All right. So you go to Wilson Art. Now, this plastic laminate is still a 32nd of an inch thick?
Yeah.
Give or take?
Ish.
Okay.
Depends. So with the glue, when you put the glue on, if you do most of the time you have to do a double roll, and especially on end grain of plywood, if you're doing it on that. And MDF, you need at least 3 coats. That thickens the layer.
Okay.
You have to account for this when you're designing and building and have those as offsets. So
Okay, so you're accounting for, I'm using MDF as a substrate, so I'm going to do 3 layers of glue on here.
Right. So MDF comes in at 3/4 of an inch. So if I'm building a console that I'm transplanting or redoing a console that has a metal frame with the modules, so I could take the metal frame out. There's no tolerance when you're working with metal. if you're off a 64th of an inch, you're stuck.
How stressful is this?
Very stressful, dude.
Do you leave yourself some wiggle room?
I do.
Okay.
I leave myself wiggle room and hope the client doesn't notice it. Because I'll leave, overall maybe a 16th of an inch, cumulatively over the whole length of like something, because
Okay, so for the listener, you are, if I understand you correctly, you are leaving a 16th inch of wiggle room over the width of a console, which, like a 48 channel console could easily be 7 feet long. So like a 16th of an inch clearance is not necessarily, so because each channel is X wide.
Yep.
And you've got 48 channels or something. So if your channel measurement is off by a 40th of an inch times X number of channels times 48 channels, a 16th of an inch is not giving you enough clearance to cover that. So Kenny is saying a 16th of an inch clearance, and saying it like this is a lot. That is a minuscule amount. Oh,
very small. I mean, I'm working in 64ths most of the time.
Okay.
And, recently, I built a couple consoles that they were damaged, so I didn't have a metal frame. And these were like especially vintage Spectrasonics consoles, which are very famous desks from the 60s and the 70s. Michael Jackson's father bought a huge 1020 for $85,000, all discrete for the family studio. Okay. That console today probably would go for $500,000. But a lot of these consoles didn't have metal rails. Or if I'm building something custom for somebody, someone just got the modules from Vintage King or whatever, I have to design my own frame. I'm using Baltic birch for that because it's very stable.
Yeah, okay.
But now I have to design this whole thing around a raw module, which, going back to that Yamaha PM1000, that was a similar situation. And it's very stressful because if the modules don't line up with the card receivers in the back, thing, I mean, being off a 64th of an inch matters.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it is stressful. And also, I think that people should know, when you're talking about building stuff out of Formica, the conventional way is building, the application would be countertops or tables or things like that. Back in, we have a bar at my parents' house that was built in the 70s, and it was all Formica. Those kind of applications. We're not talking about crazy angles, I luckily found a lot of old Porter cable trim routers with the offset base, where it has like a pulley and a belt, and you're able to get into tight inside corners.
Okay.
Inside corners are different. You can just go on the flush trim on the outside, but the inside, sometimes you can't get to it because
the base is too
sticking up. So you can't get in there to trim it. So what I first started saying here was that it takes an unbelievable amount of hours to build things out of Formica, because you have to lay up the Formica on the interior parts before you even build your carcass. So that thickness adds into the equation. That glue, the thickness of the material, and every different Formica color or series that they have is a different thickness.
No.
So the time that's involved in it, but also there's so much head scratching in trying to make something that was meant for countertops work in the recording studio. And that's what they used in all those vintage tape machines back in the 60s and the 70s. You know why? And people should know this. Formica wasn't, it got scratched a lot, but it was a protective thing. If you had raw wood, it would just get gouged.
Mm-hmm.
Remember there was a Laura Nero API that I did, about 12 years ago with Justin.
Okay.
And the Eagles recorded a lot of famous albums on this. It was at some studio in LA, and now it's at Electric Lady. Okay. And Jack Antonoff recorded the last couple Taylor Swift albums on it. That console was all Formica, and it was damaged because shipping a big console like that, it's made out of particle board underneath the Formica. And this is $1 million console now, right? Maybe close, somewhere around there, 500, something like that.
They're asking $1 million, we'll say.
Yeah, rare blonde API, 1970 or something.
Yeah.
The carcass, I had to use Bondo to fix the carcass. It was dropped from a crane, and the Formica broke, and all the particle board was just like gouged out. I had to Bondo this whole thing, but I couldn't do this in my shop. I had to do this on location before it was shipped to New York. And I do have some pictures of them. Justin sent it to me, I think, years ago, of them using a crane in Manhattan to get it into the window of like the 4th floor or something of Electric Lady.
Wow.
Electric Lady is a famous recording studio for
the Yes.
I'm rambling on the whole Formica thing. I'm sorry.
No. Because it's
there's no dovetails with that, by the way.
Yeah. So what kind of joinery are you doing with these?
I know it's a controversial word called domino. People don't like.
You know what? It might have been at one point. Everyone's just come to accept it now.
The first domino came out. I remember. Listen, I wouldn't be where I am today without credit card debt. I just never made it. I'm telling you. I remember going to buy this, and it was $800 back then.
Yeah. Okay.
First domino. I still have it. I just got it rebuilt by Festool last year.
Okay.
Everything, because I had like hundreds of hours on it. But before that, I was using biscuits, believe it or not. But biscuits aren't 100% because they swell.
Okay.
But you could use them for alignment, because when you're building a big carcass, you kind of want something to stay aligned while you're using your other hand to grab a screw.
Yeah.
So mainly domino type of stuff. Listen, one of the reasons I was reluctant to come on your podcast was because I'm not a woodworker's woodworker anymore. But I have all my hand tools and stuff like that. I just don't have time to build a Queen Anne, writing desk or whatever. You know what I mean? And I watch these guys all day long. I have Mike Pekovich's books over there on my thing there, and I look through there and I'm like, gosh, I can't wait to get older so I could just do that. You know what I mean? Well, I'm in my late 50s, but you know what I mean?
But dude, that is exactly why I wanted to have you on, because I think of you as a woodworker's woodworker. And if we sit there and say all woodworking is one thing, that's like saying all music is jazz and punk music isn't music. It's not artistry. Or, Americana music isn't artistry because they have no idea what an augmented chord is, right?
That's a great analogy.
And your woodworking is true to what you do. And there's so many other people out there who have these very, very specialized things. And I find it all interesting. And I think that everybody's experiences will enrich everybody else's experiences. So like if we only talk about cutting dovetails one particular way, then what good is that? Whereas there's a whole different world of woodworking out there that nobody ever thought of. And next time you see that movie and they're in the recording studio, just take a look and you'll see everything's covered in walnut colored Formica.
Let me say this. I listen to your podcast all the time. I've been getting fine woodworking since 1984 or whenever it was on here. And I also have some back issues I bought on eBay. I'm passionate about woodworking. Yeah. I took lessons from Rob Cosman, all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm not able to build, I love that, what's that Tenon magazine? That
Mornison Tenon.
I love that magazine. And I dream of just being able to do that, but I have to make a living.
Yeah.
And I love building things and I love the outcome and I love being able to service my peers in this recording business as a recording engineer.
Yeah.
And I'm a perfectionist. I care way too much about things that I build. like someone wants to buy something. I just built some racks. I'm like, I'm not going to sell my rack, that thing I just built to you. You're not, you know what I mean? Like, I want somebody to really appreciate it, you know, the way I did. Remember, just a couple weeks ago, I posted some video on Facebook about building these retro Formica racks.
Yeah. Yeah.
83 and a half hours to Formica to do that whole, just 10 racks. And I did it for the love of it because no one's going to pay me for those hours, you know, but, you know, when you see your stuff out in the wild, like especially some of the consoles that I built for well-known people, you know, it's so satisfying that you have this contribution of, you know, what you're passionate about to help somebody else. And that said, also, I mean, one day I would love to just build conventional woodworking projects, you know, just stuff. I want to build furniture for my house, you know, like Sam Alouf had, you know?
Yeah.
You know, or Mike Pekovich's house is probably decorated with everything that you see in the pictures that he has in the book, you know? So
it's that on Stun.
Really?
Because
oh my God.
There's so many pieces. It's almost like where do y'all sit in here?
I would love to be surrounded by beautiful things that I made.
Well, but I'll be honest with you. I've been in Tim Rousseau's house and he had the IKEA chair in the corner too, because at the end of the day, Tim Rousseau can't afford Tim Rousseau furniture. So there's always that. We used to ask people, we used to do these 10-question videos. And one question that we asked was, what percentage of the house what percentage of the furniture in your house did you make? And the range was crazy. Some of it was like, I have like 3 things in my house that I made. Everything else is from Goodwill, you know?
I have my studio furniture in my own studio, not woodworking studio, by the way, recording studio.
Recording studio, yes.
But the Village Cobbler's kids have no shoes.
Yeah.
That saying?
Yep.
I mean, you're always running and gunning it every day.
Yeah. You're making a living, dude.
And you know, this is the other aspect of this being self-employed. You know, at the end of the day, you have to eat. But I also am not compromising on my integrity and painting behind a refrigerator with things that people are never going to notice, right? But I underneath these racks, it's for my good. You know what I mean? It took me extra time to do that.
Yeah.
And routing Formica is not fun. You know, you have full, you know, biohazard gear on because that stuff will kill you. You know.
What about glue? What are you doing for glue now?
I'm using the Wilson Art 500 cement adhesive. Okay. And I tried water-based, you know, or non-toxic types of stuff. And this is, you know, I'll take on a Formica job here and there, depending on the weather. Can I have the door open? Is it humid out? I don't want the humidity to ruin something, you know. But you have to take a lot into account when you're going to do that. And I live in the same house that I build in. So.
Yeah, you don't want to stink up the house.
All of the basics and the fundamentals of woodworking applies to what I'm doing now because it's background knowledge. Just like you and I as engineers who are also musicians, we're recording an album for somebody, but we also know deep music theory.
Yeah.
We're not accessing it directly, but it's there in the background. And it's that foundation that got us where we are now, right? And it's the same thing for building. I'm very old school in a lot of my ways. And I think about it every time, you know, I come across somebody who wants to intern with me. And I feel bad for them because they think that they're just going to sit in a chair and make an album or sit in my workshop and make a piece of furniture. There's so much background knowledge that I go on rabbit holes with, you know. All this important this important information about even just using your tools, using your layout tools, things that we take for granted, that's just background information. So if I'm building just a simple Formica rack for somebody, there's joinery involved. There's, you know, calculating exactly, they're really 19 1/8. It's not 19 inches. When someone starts building a 19-inch rack.
You do that once.
You know what I mean? But when you're using Formica or whatever, you're adding all these things in, and you're also thinking 10 steps ahead. And you can't, at 57, I can't multitask like my nephew can, or someone else. I can't even listen to a podcast. I have to turn it off, or music when I'm doing the deep stuff, the deep work. And I think that was important to mention, that whatever, because people look at, if you're making things that are technically utilitarian like I am, that doesn't mean that fine woodworking doesn't apply.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because do I use my chisels every week or my hand plane? No, but there's times I do. You know what I mean? Or if I need to make something out of real wood for somebody. I made a couple of pieces over the last few years for, certain installations that were made out of either, Alex McCullough that we talked about.
Oh, yeah.
Hi to you. He asked me to build a Buchla cabinet for a synthesizer for him, and I used it as Sepele, but I didn't have time to dovetail everything. You know what I mean? So, you had to. I think I used dominoes or something, but I had to get all the exact measurements from him, and I kept going back to his studio to measure his, those little modules for the Euro rack.
Mm-hmm.
Just get it all right, because it's going to be on Instagram. Someone's going to take a picture. You know what I mean? And you can't go back.
That wraps this episode of Shop Talk Live. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a 5-star review on iTunes and be sure to follow us on our YouTube channel. If you'd like to submit questions for a future episode, email us at shoptalk@finewoodworking.com. Our Discord channel is a great place to chat with other woodworkers, get an inside peek at the next episode of Shop Talk Live, and submit curated questions for future episodes. Registration for Woodworking in America is now open. This is a 2-day event, October 11th and 12th, and will feature a series of live presentations from a growing list of woodworkers, an exhibition hall, and more. We'll also be recording a live episode of Shop Talk Live with a live audience Q&A. Hope to see you there. Thanks for listening. We'll see you again in 2 weeks.
Well, I have my mic flat on this 7B. Can you see the settings here?
Yeah. No, I can see it.
So I figured I don't want to mess with the EQ for you. I edit a podcast for a local business.
Okay.
And she'll send me a podcast or two a month. And it takes 4 hours to do a 1-hour podcast.
Nobody believes me. I think I'm pretty quick at 3.
Are you still recording?
I am recording now, yeah. We haven't said anything that we're going to use on the podcast yet.
Like in life.
Oh.